The morning of September 3rd, 2009, arrived with an unbearable weight pressing down on Los Angeles. Inside the Forest Lawn Memorial Park, a small gathering of Michael Jackson's closest family members stood in absolute silence. The world had mourned the king of pop for months, but this moment belonged to them alone. His brothers, his sisters, his children, and his mother Catherine stood together, their faces etched with grief that no amount of time could erase. The chapel was dim, illuminated only by soft candlelight that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Everything about this day felt wrong, impossible even. Michael Jackson wasn't supposed to die at 50. He wasn't supposed to leave them behind. Janet gripped her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. She couldn't stop shaking. None of them could. The casket sat before them, a magnificent piece of craftsmanship covered in gold and adorned with red roses, his favorite flower. It was sealed shut, as it had been since the public memorial service at the Staples Center. But today, the family had made a decision that would haunt them forever. They needed to see him one last time. They needed confirmation that the man lying inside was truly their Michael, their brother, their son. The decision hadn't come easily. There had been arguments, tears, and desperate pleas from those who wanted to remember him as he was during life. But Catherine had been firm. She needed to see her baby boy. She needed to say goodbye properly. As the funeral director approached with solemn steps, the room fell into a silence so profound that every breath sounded like thunder. He placed his hands on the casket's edge, looked at the family with sympathetic eyes, and asked one final time if they were certain. Catherine nodded, her tears falling freely now. The sound of the casket unsealing echoed through the chapel like a crack of lightning. It was a mechanical hiss followed by a soft click that seemed to reverberate in everyone's chest. The funeral director moved with practiced care, his movements slow and reverent as he lifted the upper half of the casket. The family collectively held their breath, every eye fixed on what would be revealed. When the lid finally opened completely, the silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a kind of silence that swallows sound itself, that makes time stop moving forward. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Inside the casket lay Michael Jackson, but something was immediately, terribly wrong. The man before them looked nothing like the vibrant performer who had moonwalked across stages worldwide. His skin had taken on an unnatural, almost waxen quality that made him look less like a person and more like an eerily perfect replica. His face, which had been so expressive in life, now seemed frozen in an expression that was neither peaceful nor troubled but somewhere disturbingly in between. Jermaine was the first to step forward, his legs barely able to support his weight. He reached toward his brother, but stopped short, his hand trembling in mid-air. Something about Michael's appearance struck him as fundamentally wrong, though he couldn't immediately identify what. The makeup artists had done their work, attempting to restore some color to his features, but there was something beneath it all that seemed off. La Toya covered her mouth, suppressing a gasp. She had prepared herself for sadness, for the pain of seeing her brother's lifeless form. But she hadn't prepared herself for this. The man in the casket looked simultaneously like Michael and like a stranger wearing his face. Every detail was technically correct, but somehow incorrect at the same time. Paris Jackson, only 11 years old, broke away from her grandmother's grasp and rushed toward the casket. Prince and Blanket tried to hold her back, but she was inconsolable, desperate to see her father one last time. When she reached the casket's edge and looked inside, her young face contorted with confusion before the tears came. She turned to Catherine with questions in her eyes that no one could answer. Why did Daddy look so different? Why did he seem so cold and distant, even more than death should make him? It was Tito who noticed it first. His years of performing had given him an eye for detail, for things that were slightly out of place on stage. He leaned closer, squinting in the dim light, and his breath caught in his throat. The small mole on Michael's neck, the one that had been there since childhood, was on the wrong side. His heart began to race as he noticed other inconsistencies. The curve of the jawline seemed subtly different. The hands, folded peacefully across the chest, had fingernails that were slightly too long, too perfect. Michael had always bitten his nails during times of stress. These hands looked like they'd never known anxiety. Tito stumbled backward, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were telling him. He grabbed Jermaine's arm, pulling him closer, and whispered urgently in his ear. Jermaine's eyes widened as he looked again, this time searching for the details Tito had pointed out. The color drained from his face. Jackie joined them, then Marlon, and one by one, the brothers formed a tight circle, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. Catherine watched her sons with growing alarm. She demanded to know what they were discussing, but they couldn't find the words. How do you tell a mother that the body in the casket might not be her son? The funeral director was called back into the room, and the questions began pouring out in desperate torrents. The brothers pointed out every inconsistency, every detail that seemed wrong. The director's face grew pale as he examined the body more closely, pulling out documents and photographs of comparison. His hands shook as he flipped through pages, cross-referencing every marking, every identifying feature that should have been present. The room erupted into chaos. Voices rose in anger, fear, and disbelief. Janet demanded answers. Her usual composure shattered completely. La Toya was on her phone, calling attorneys, calling anyone who might explain what were happening. Catherine collapsed into a chair, her body racked with sobs as a possibility formed in her mind. If this wasn't Michael in the casket, then where was he? What had happened to her son's body? The questions multiplied faster than answers could form. Had there been a mix-up at the coroner's office? Had someone deliberately switched the bodies? Why would anyone do such a thing? The conspiracy theories that had swirled around Michael's death suddenly seemed less like paranoid fantasies and more like potential realities. Security was immediately summoned. Phone calls were made to the coroner, to the police, to everyone involved in the preparation and transportation of Michael's body from the moment of death until this very second. Each call brought more confusion, more contradictions, more impossible explanations. Records showed that Michael Jackson's body had been properly identified, properly handled, properly sealed. But the evidence before their eyes told a different story entirely. The family refused to leave the chapel. They stood guard around the casket, unwilling to let this body out of their sight until someone provided real answers. Hours passed in agonizing slowness. Investigators arrived. Photographers documented every angle, and forensic experts were called in to examine the body. The comparison between this corpse and Michael's known medical records revealed discrepancies that couldn't be explained away. By nightfall, the truth emerged in fragments, each piece more disturbing than the last. There had been confusion in the chaos following Michael's death, a series of administrative failures and miscommunications that seemed almost impossible to believe. In the frantic rush to prepare for the public memorial service, with millions of eyes watching worldwide and security concerns at maximum levels, someone had made an error that had resulted in the wrong body being prepared, displayed, and very nearly buried as Michael Jackson. The real Michael had been in a separate facility the entire time, held for additional autopsy work that the family hadn't been informed about. The revelation brought simultaneous relief and horror. Their Michael still existed, but they had been mourning over a stranger. They had poured their grief onto someone else's loved one, while their brother had been lying alone in a cold morgue, unvisited and unmourned by his own family. The questions of how such a catastrophic mistake could occur would lead to investigations, lawsuits, and reforms in how celebrity deaths were handled. But in that moment, none of the legal ramifications mattered. The family needed to see the real Michael to finally say their proper goodbyes. When they were finally brought to him hours later, the difference was immediate and unmistakable. This was their Michael. Every familiar feature was exactly where it should be. The mole was on the correct side. The hands were his hands. The face was his face. Even in death, there was something unmistakably him about the body before them. The goodbye they shared in those quiet hours before dawn was private, sacred, and final. When Michael Jackson was finally laid to rest on September 3rd, 2009, his family knew with absolute certainty that it was truly him. The casket that was sealed that day contained the King of Pop, and this time there would be no doubt, no questions, no terrible silences, just the peaceful rest that had eluded him in life.